My name is Bob, and I love my two-car garage. Look at all these routers. I got 5 of them here. Why do I have so many? I have a lot because I use the router a lot. If you don't have one of these, I would say this is at least number 3 on your list of things to buy for your shop. Now, I'm going to show you quickly some of the advantages or features of each of these. First of all, I've got this little Makita mini router or trim router here. I like it because it's easy to handle, first of all, because it's small. The adjustment is nice, so I can precisely adjust the depth of my cut up and down and lock it into place. And it has a variable speed, which is nice. Step up from this little guy. It's either one of these. I bought this one in 1972. It's a Craftsman router. I think it was the 3rd tool that I ever bought. And the base on it's a little wobbly right now. Notice the base plate is missing because I usually have it mounted in this table back here, which we're going to show you later. This one's pretty much the same size, quarter cable, and I like the adjustment on this. It's simple, it's easy to adjust up and down, and pretty good at locking in at the right height. Also like this because, and most routers are this way, you can replace the base plate with a different size base plate with a different size hole in it right here for larger or smaller bits. Also, the chuck or collet that the bit fits into is replaceable, so I can use a router bit with a 1/2 inch shank or a 1/4 inch shank in this router. This collet right here is interchangeable with this big router right here, which is a Porter Cable big guy. And the advantage to this, obviously, is that it's big and it's powerful. The features are pretty much the same. I don't use it as much as I use this one or the small one. You can mount this in a table and makes a pretty good, decent shaper as well. So, the last one is the plunge router. Now, I don't actually own this router because I don't use them as much as some people do. Some people think they're the greatest, but I don't use them a lot. The advantage to this, obviously, is that it plunges up and down like that. With so many routers to choose from, which one should you buy? I think that there's 3 or 4 things that you should look for. Number 1, metal. Is it made out of metal or is it made out of plastic? If it's made out of plastic or a lot of plastic, don't buy it. Number 2 is size. I think that the medium-sized router is going to serve you the best. So, I'm not going to buy that one first, and I'm not going to buy the big guy first. Another thing that you want to look for is the way the chuck or the collet loosens and tightens. I think the simpler design is better. You're going to get a couple of wrenches that come with your router, and this one, on this particular one, you're going to hold the motor and grab onto the nut that's on the end of the router chuck, and you're going to loosen that chuck or collet, and then that bit should just slide right out of there. Sometimes it requires a little persuasion, but I like the simplicity of this. Some of these routers have little buttons that lock the chuck somehow up inside the motor. I don't like that because I've had them fail on me. The last thing that I think is important when you're looking for a router is how this depth adjustment works. And this one is a little rough, so when I move it up and down, it's a little more difficult for me to get in place, but I like the way it locks. So this has a simple locking mechanism on it that clamps it down in the right place, and it's easy enough for me to adjust the height. There is a router out there. It's made by Bosch, and it has a more precise adjustment for a height, and I like that one too. It's about 10 bucks more. Both of these run about $150, $160 retail. All right, so what makes a router so great? It's this and this and this. It's all the different things you can do with the router. I can put different shapes on the edges of my wood. I have a bunch of bits here that just do sort of utilitarian things, but you can do a ton with your router. These are kind of pricey. I would buy them one at a time if I were you, and I would buy the carbide tips because they work the best. Now, just for the sake of demonstration here, I'm going to replace this large rounding over bit that I have on my router with a smaller one. And with this particular router, again, I'm going to hold the shaft with my wrench, and with the other wrench, I'm going to turn it counterclockwise. That guy should come right out of there like that. I'm going to put a new one in. I'm going to put a smaller one in this time. I've got this little guy right here. So I'm going to use that bit in here. You should always check to make sure this little bearing on the end is spinning freely, because it does get gunked up with stuff. If it doesn't turn freely, you're going to burn the edge of your wood. There's a little screw right there. You can take that off, soak it in some solvent, clean it up, and get it working nicely. So I'm going to put this one back in there. The way you're going to do it is you're going to put it all the way in, and then you're going to bring it out a little bit. So just reverse the process, hold the shaft, and tighten the nut. Because I'm using a bit that's much smaller than this base plate, I don't want the wood to fall down inside there, so I'm going to replace my base plate with the base plate with the smaller hole size. Now I'm going to adjust my base plate so the radius that I have on my cutter is just going to kind of meet the base plate of my router. And there's going to be a little trial and error here when I actually make my cut. Alright, a couple things before I actually turn this guy on. First of all, it really screams. It spins at about 20,000 RPMs as compared to your table saw, which is under 5,000 RPMs. Makes a lot of noise, so I'm going to wear ear protection. Also, make sure you clamp your work down, because it'll get away from you, especially if you're using larger bits. So I got my work clamp down, got my ear protection. Finally, you're going to move from left to right. That's really important. If you go the wrong way, it's going to get away from you. So I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to move across the wood like this. This particular bit has a bearing on it, so it's just going to glide across the surface of the wood and give me a nice, smooth, round edge on this piece of poplar. One of the things I really like about this rounding over bit is I can use it in a couple different ways. I can just round the edge of the wood, or I can drop it down a little bit deeper. So I'm going to put about a heavy 1/16 above the base of the wood, and then when I make my cut, I'm going to get a little step and then a little bit of a rounding over, which is a cool look. And so this little edge right here is what makes the router such a cool tool. You can do hundreds of things with the router, well worth $160.